and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero, and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I'm not a licensed therapist, but what I am this week is sad. You know why I'm sad?
I do.
So longtime viewers of the podcast know that we've oftentimes had cameos from our furry little third co-host, Max the cat. We've gotten a lot of comments over the last season about his lack of appearances on the podcast. Unfortunately, his health has been declining, and this past week he did pass, and we are very sad about it. You're already crying. And so this podcast is dedicated to the best feline reality TV podcast co-host, Max the cat.
Yeah, and you are the honesty broker, so it must be true.
I am the honesty broker, and it must be true. Yeah. So he brought us a lot of joy, and I know that a lot of the audience, when he was around, they really got a kick out of him. So we're really sad. We really miss him. And with that, let's get into another sad set of events, and that would be this finale.
Whoa, what a pivot. Yes, so we are here talking about Grant Ellis's season of The Bachelor, season 29. We made it to finale day. So we're going to get into all of our thoughts about the finale. But before we do...
Do you need a tissue before we do? I didn't think that went through.
I'm good. They'll dry. Before we get into all of that, please go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. We have more coming your way. And you know, there's Bachelor in Paradise on the way, which we heard a little bit about tonight. So subscribe, be a part of our growing community. And we love seeing you in the comments too.
Yeah, please also hit that bell icon so that you're alerted anytime we post new content to the channel. And speaking of new content, I feel like maybe we need to do like a couples podcast on dealing with grief after a loss of a loved one. We're gonna think about that.
Yeah.
Do you know about grief? You're a head person.
Yeah. I mean, grief is a universal human experience. It's something that we will all experience in life.
And we definitely saw Grant dealing with some grief in this episode.
In more ways than one.
I mean, that's two solid pivots right in the first 2 minutes of the episode.
Yeah.
Come on.
I mean, do you want to talk about Max or do you not want to talk about Max? I'm not sure.
Well, I don't want us both to be crying.
So your thoughts about the finale?
Oh, yeah. I mean... no big surprises. I mean, I think we all were leaning towards Juliana. I think we're going to get into a little bit later about what we think that means about Grant. But I feel like we walked into this episode and we had one strong woman, like truly a woman ready for life, ready for the next step, ready to give Grant everything that he claims and professes that he wants. And then we had another individual who is a lot more childish and not prepared to give Grant what he wants. I think it was a really stark dichotomy between these two women. I like them both in different ways, but in terms of their readiness for marriage, I think that it was a pretty clear and stark difference. And so I wonder what that really says about Grant and his readiness based on the decisions that he made in this episode. But yeah, that's my thoughts. What about you?
You know, I found myself, and we watched it together, so you know, I found myself multiple times when we were kind of like nearing the proposals, kind of like, and when we found out like how the decision went down, like saying out loud, like this was it, like this was it the whole time, and
anticlimactic across the entire season.
Yeah,
it
was anticlimactic, and you know, I don't know what that means in terms of like why they teased and why they set Grant up in this way to kind of be this very indecisive person, like what that was about.
Something to just
have
juice
something to
anything
talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a predictable season across the board. No big surprises. The ending was very lackluster. You know, I think the most surprising thing is that, you know, who he picks, they're still together at the end, right? Like, I think that is the biggest surprise, right?
Yeah. When Jesse said they're still together, essentially, you were like, oh, wow.
Didn't see that one coming. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, definitely we've got some stuff to talk about here. Where do you want to begin?
Should we just do the women collectively? We'll do, just start off with Latia. We'll talk about her meeting the family. Then we'll talk about her last chance date, and then we'll move over to Juliana and do the same.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so Latia, we start off meeting the family. She, crushes it on every axis on which you could crush it. The family loves her. She answers questions directly, succinctly, without batting an eye. She comes across as genuine, and she is constantly demonstrating that she is literally exactly what Grant has asked for.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they keep Grant's father specifically keeps relaying what a woman with strong values she is. Mm-hmm. Like that is also shining through in, how Grant sees her, describes her, and how they experience her as well.
And the mother clearly adores her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that anybody could have crushed a parent meeting more than she crushed this parent meeting. Mm-hmm. We got, interestingly enough, in both of them, we got nothing from Grant's sister. Mm-hmm. They showed us no conversations.
No.
And part of me wonders if, we did get her. She came in earlier in the season, and there's just so much there with the parents that, it might have taken away from the scene.
But the sister said to Latia, I liked you from day one to Latia. She said nothing to Juliana. And I don't know if it was just me. And my mom just texted me this, that Grant's sister Taylor didn't look particularly jazzed in the AFR, in the after final rose. So I don't know what that's about, but we did get her endorsement for Latia, at least at the time of the family meeting.
Yeah, interesting. I did not pick up on that.
You don't understand women fighting.
I do not understand women fighting. No, I don't. It's very strange.
I can't wait for you to watch this week's episode of The White Lotus so we can.
I mean, the three women in the episode of The White Lotus they are so unlikable and so unrelatable to me.
Of course.
That it's just like there are good characters and there are bad characters. And good characters, even if they're bad, they're good because they make you want to keep watching even when you hate them. Those three characters in that show actually make me want to just turn the TV off. That's how bad
they're so relatable.
I know they're relatable.
But that will not be the focal point of what we talk about. We will not be doing a White Lotus podcast.
Especially not season 3. It is a far cry from seasons 1 and 2.
But anyway, so yeah, I mean, Latia crushes this family date. They seem really happy. So in regard to some of the individual chats that are going on between Latia and the parents and Grant and his parents, are there any particular pieces of those conversations that stick out to you?
Well, I think what was most noteworthy to me was how quality the questions were from from Grant's mother to Latia. I thought she asked really good, pointed, direct questions. And these are questions that you can't really hide from, right? And Latia didn't attempt, there was no doubt, she hit him dead on. Things like, how do you know you love my husband, my son, right? How do you know you're ready to be a wife and make Grant a husband? Like these types of questions, are so direct, no beating around the bush. And yeah, I mean, Latia understood the question, understood the assignment, landed the plane while we're mixing metaphors, right? So
yeah, for sure. I mean, she had such solid answers, and it seemed like they weren't performative. They were genuine. They were based on her own experience and what she's come to know and love about Grant. So yeah, I think that, we hear, I would imagine, what every mom hopes to hear about, these answers to these questions. And what we learn from Latia is in terms of starting their life together, kind of starting in a neutral place where they, would both be new, that she's willing to move away from her family, this and that. And I think I want to come back to this part of the conversation later when we kind of get to the Juliana of it all.
Sure. Well, I do want to know your take on the neutral location. So I thought this was a curious response because we know that Grant has said at various different points in time in the season that he is apprehensive about leaving his family because he is a support system to his father who is still in recovery. And that seems like a mark against her, right? That she wants to start in a neutral location. But then she says, also I want my kids to be close to you, to Grant's mother. And it's like, well, that's a weird combination. Like, what is that? I don't know how to reconcile that. Now, again, I don't know how that got edited out and what the longer conversation was, but those seem to kind of be in conflict with one another. And yeah. Any thoughts on this or not really?
Well, I mean, I think there's a piece of, we didn't want to pick one family over the other. And I want our kids to be close to both families. Like, I think that was the idea. I also like the concept of being on equal footing and like being, as she had put it, like being in a neutral place where it's new to both of us. And so I could also see that being like sort of a place that they build their own foundation rather than like one or the other. But yeah, the piece about being away from his dad in recovery is meaningful. I mean, especially considering again what the current outcome is.
Yeah, my question really is it one too many transitions here, right? You have rushed into an engagement theoretically where
this is going to be my later point. I don't know if it's one too many transitions. I think it's for Latia one too many compromises. And it makes me, says how badly she wants this, right? Like I believe her sincerely that she wants to get married and become a mom as soon as she can. And she's willing to, for this man that she loves, move away from her family, be in this more neutral territory. She's willing to move her timeline of like when would be comfortable for her to start a family, which we hear her later say. Like she just seems like she's so
she starts to come across as in these last few episodes as a pick me girl. And she even says the words pick me.
Yeah.
And it's just like a little cringy, right? It's a little cringy where, and again, she's so genuine throughout the season. And we get some commentary from her that she really feels as though Grant has led her on in a lot of ways. And so I can kind of understand where maybe it's, to us, it comes across as cringy and pick me, but to her, it's coming across as playful because he's given her so much assurances. And I don't know where that line is. We know that Grant has a tendency to be a little bit too affirming, a little too agreeable, a little too accommodating, a little too unwilling to hurt people's feelings. And so I can sympathize with Latia, and maybe think like, okay, maybe this was really her being a little bit playful because there's just stuff on screen that we're not seeing. But there was definitely, with just what we see on the screen, there was definitely a little bit of a pick me thing happening. And so I, as I've said in the past, pick me is a huge turnoff for guys.
Well, it's like the worst thing. Well, not really, but one of the worst insults you can give to a woman in 2025 is that you're a pick me girl. And so it's also from like a woman's perspective, like not something that you want to be known as.
Yeah. All right. So shall we go over to the last chance date?
Yeah. I mean, right before they get to the date, though, Latia does say that Grant is the first person that she's actually expressed the words "I love you" to.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes,
they do get into it a little bit later, but that is like a way that they kind of close out the family portion of this date.
Yeah. And obviously that's pretty meaningful. So the last chance date is the infamous date that we hate, horseback riding. And isn't this the second time that they specifically have done it? Didn't they?
Yeah, they did it on her hometown.
On her hometown.
Yeah.
What are we doing? And what a crap day she got. Pouring rain. Everyone's in ponchos and they're just like riding around and through the mud. It looked, no part of this looked fun.
She looked like she was having way more fun doing this than ziplining.
That's fair, but again, on a relative basis, she looked miserable.
Yeah.
Ziplining. So like, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily the bar in which that I want to measure her happiness. But look, they had great conversations. She says all the right things. It is so clear to anybody who's listened to Grant and has observed these two together and has listened to Latia that Latia is the obvious correct pick if Grant is being honest with himself and the audience.
Right. Well, and one thing that Grant tells his father during their chat is, look, Latia said that she's 31 and she wants to have a kid, like begin having kids in like 2 years. I've been essentially playing basketball my entire 20s. I never really got to explore my life. I really never got to have fun. And I just kind of envisioned that when I got married, we would be able to do that for 3 or 4 years. And so I don't know. Yeah. Which I don't think this made it to the episode. But last week I had said when Latia put that timeline, or we heard her say that timeline, Grant was out. Like, he was out.
Well, I mean, I have conflicting opinions about that because men don't think about timelines. Men's
Until
biology,
what? They're staring down at the barrel?
exactly. Remember something. Men's biology just turns on and stays on our entire lives, right? Women's biology turns on and then shuts off,
Mm-hmm.
and thus women have a much more constrained timeline, and they have to by just from a biological perspective. Women have to think about timelines. Men don't, right? Until a man is confronted with the timeline, he's not thinking about it. I mean, I just think back when I was in my teens, in my 20s, and how many times I would meet, a girl and they would say, like, oh, I want to be like married at this age, kids at this age. And I'm like, uh, I've literally never thought of
Mm-hmm.
these things
Mm-hmm.
ever. Right. Um, so I don't necessarily think that when she said her timeline, Grant was out.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he might be out because now he's confronted with a timeline. He has to go down and sit down with that and think about that,
Mm-hmm.
and it might put him out.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not willing to say that right off the bat just because their timelines conflicted. He's given such small amount of thought to his timeline that
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they conflicted is not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things. I think there
Mm-hmm.
are other reasons why Grant will make his decisions between the two outside of the timeline.
Well, they do talk about this,
Mhm.
Latia and Grant later, which I was happy to hear. Like Grant address this as like his big question that he has in regard to Latia is this timeline situation with having kids, and you know, I'm curious to hear about like your reactions to her answer. So she basically says he asks her, "What if I'm not ready in 2 years?" And she says, "Well, I want you to tell me and tell me about why it is that you're not ready. And if it's because there are things that you still want to accomplish so that you can feel excited and be present. I know you want to be a present dad. I want you to be ready. And so if those were the cases, then yeah, like I want you to be ready. So yeah, okay, that's fine. We would kind of delay. What do
Mhm.
you think about this?
Okay, so I understand the premise of the show is that the lead asks the questions and gets to make the decisions, but when Grant asked this question, Latia's proper response was, "I'm sorry, I'm out."
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's a lot happening here. One, Grant has fallen prey to modernity. You don't get to be a kid forever. You don't get to have your cake and eat it too.
Mm-hmm.
Life is about making choices, hard choices, and making sacrifices. You chose to go and play pro, semi pro, whatever it was, basketball. That's the choice you made. You're 31 years old now. It's time to settle down. And if you're not willing to settle down, then you need to drop pretty significantly in age.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be going after, women in their 30s. It's not fair to them. They're all going to have an expedited timeline from what you believe because they are facing down biology. And if you want to dink around for 3 or 4 years, which means you're now having, you're now having a 35-year-old wife, and you're also telling her that you want 3, 4, 5 kids. You are not living in the land of reality. You're being actually quite selfish. You're just kind of setting everything up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
So I get this. This is something that men and women do a lot now. Women want to, it's so important for me to have a career. And then they end up in Latia's case where she's 31 and, is now trying to find a husband in a rush, and that she can have kids with. She made some mistakes. If this was that important to her, she made mistakes focusing on her career. Grant is now making the same mistake, or the inverse mistake, where he claims that he spent a bunch of time focused on these other things that weren't that much fun. I'm sorry, running around playing basketball. If you didn't have fun doing that, I have no sympathy for you, Grant. Like you're playing professional basketball, traveling around the world. If that wasn't fun, shame on you. You're driving around a $200,000 car. I think you had enough fun. So that's where I come down on this entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a bad. I think it's a bad look for Latia to placate an answer to him on this topic.
Mm-hmm.
I think she needs to come down firmly and say, "I'm 31."
Mm-hmm. Like Lexi from Joey season.
Lexi from Joey season was a perfect example. Again, and Joey handled things fantastic. And I don't remember how old Lexi was, but she had a
She was
medical
about that
condition.
same age,
But
31.
yeah,
maybe.
she also had a medical condition that was going to make it more difficult. So she was on an even more expedited clock. Yeah, I thought this was a bad look for both Grant and Latia in this exchange. I think this was the moment where Latia should have realized that this was going in the wrong direction. And the fact that Grant is even asking this question was answer to himself. The question of like, am I actually ready for this? And the answer is clearly no.
Right. And I could understand where, for Latia, this didn't stand out because to her point, she's been clear about what her timeline has been from the jump. And so as she had said to Jesse and to him and the audience, like this wasn't new information for Grant. But again, now there's a real ticking clock on it. And he's probably relating to the information differently, reacting to it differently than he did, 6 weeks ago when this was like further down the line when he'd have to do something with it.
Yep.
They end their evening. They seem in a good place. Latia is confident that she is getting engaged the following day. And again, we hear later that he had sort of affirmed this as well. I'm excited about. I'm excited about tomorrow. Is kind of what she said. So do we want to move into engagement day or do we want to then roll the tape back and talk about Juliana?
Let's talk Juliana first. Let's do some compare and contrast. So Juliana's meeting with the family, this was bizarre.
This was really odd.
So the father clearly loved her. I don't really understand why.
He was a completely different vibe. Like in the way that I had said Zoe like kind of bloomed and blossomed in her like consult with Rachel last episode. Like I felt like we saw a totally different side of Grant's dad.
Yeah, a really engaging, more interesting character.
Yeah.
I thought that Juliana overwhelmingly came across just very kiddish and a little bit childish, relative to the poise that Latia. Very nervous. She did not answer a single question.
No, she like hedged as though she were the lead. When we've seen the hometowns and the parents are like, well, do you love my daughter? And they're like giving this roundabout way. That's what she did.
Very evasive. Time. Yeah. Very evasive, rambling, never quite. And sometimes I'm like, did she even hear the question? Like even the first question that she got asked by Grant's mother, like she went on this rambling answer.
Yeah,
like,
the same question she asked Latia, how did you know that you love my son? And she talked about essentially this hard time that she went through and that she was able to have a hard conversation with Grant.
Yeah, it's like that was a terrible answer. And it went downhill from there. I don't really understand because even when the father I think the father was just looking at a really pretty girl, right? And he was just like so starstruck by the pretty girl because even when she was like engaging with him, like she's like, oh yeah. It's like, but I don't feel like you are connected to the conversation the way he is trying to be connected to this conversation. So I don't know what got lost.
There must have been something that we didn't see because even the mom said he seems so happy and it seems like he's found his way with you. And so there's again something about their connection or whatever that just was not translating at all. The other thing, again, where I was like, okay, it's definitely Latia is, and this is classic.
You mean definitely Juliana.
Sorry. Yeah, definitely Juliana. So classic coin flip scenario in a way where, and I'll explain what I mean in a second. So, Grant's mom asks Juliana, do you love my son? And then again, she gives this waffly drawn out answer that basically says, I am not there yet. And, there's someone else here. I can't, say it. And so his mom like flat out tells Grant, like, listen, if she doesn't say she loves you, then I'm asking you to walk away from that.
Which we all thought that this was an edit job, but no, she legitimately said, punt one of these women.
Yeah.
If something doesn't happen.
If she doesn't say it. And Grant defends her. And that's where, sometimes we see this in The Bachelor and they're meeting with the family and the parents might not be like fully supporting the one that they, want to pick. And then or maybe they're unsure and the parents being sure in a particular direction forces their hand. Like, and what I mean by the coin flip situation is like, if you don't know what you want and you flip a coin and then like based on your reaction to whatever the coin flip tells you, that gives you a sense of really what it was you were wanting in the first
Problem
place.
is Grant wants both.
Well, he doesn't though.
Well, I really, he's a guy who likes his cake and eats it too. The 31-year-old who got to play professional basketball now wants to go be a kid for 3 years.
Okay. Any other things from this family chat that you want to?
No, I thought she overwhelmingly bombed this, and I apparently am on an island unto myself because the father seemed to like Juliana way more than he liked Latia. Don't get it. The mother clearly had her reservations, and she voices those reservations to your point, but like she just Grant just sort of brushes that aside, defends her, and
he says, like, whether it's to his mom or to us as the audience, like, listen, I know Juliana's guarded. Like, I know it's going to take her a bit. And so I'm going to lean in here and I'm going to tell her how I'm feeling. And so he ends up putting himself out there and tells Juliana that he loves her. And then again, in a weird roundabout way, she responds and says, I love you too.
So Grant's big mistake here is the double I love you.
Yeah.
Obviously. Like, look, that's not what love is, dude. Like you can't love multiple people as a romantic, partner, spouse. That's just not how this works. So it's already a demonstration that you don't really get what love is, but fine. I get it. What you really mean is you have really strong feelings for these women. But you can't tell two women that. I mean, once you say I love you to somebody, especially in a setting like this, you are effectively making a promise to them. And that's the thing. I keep thinking about the author that I like who talks about promises and payoffs, right? And when you make a promise in any sort of narrative, right? And this is a narrative, right? When you make a promise, whether it be tonal or whatever, like you have to pay that off. If you don't, you leave the audience very unsatisfied and angry. And that's exactly what we see. Every season where this happens, what happens? The audience is unhappy. And the audience, by that I mean not just a viewing audience, but the other participants, right? Because you have implicitly made a promise by saying that you love them, and you just can't do that. So this was his big mistake. He didn't make that many. A lot of little blunders, didn't have control early in the season, but he didn't make that many real big blunders.
Yeah.
But this is a big blunder. Huge blunder.
Yeah, and like as we saw on the show, I mean, they brought back 3 of many leads that have told 2 people that they love them and so he's not alone in this. This happens like more frequently than not. It used to not happen.
How do people keep making the same mistakes?
Because Ben Higgins did it, and it it didn't work out for him for his season, and in a sense, like, he's still beloved, and Ben Higgins was a beloved Bachelor, and if he could do it and not be crucified, he walked so that all these other leads could run here.
Okay. I mean, I'm very confused by the audience's reactions to Grant in this episode, that I have no idea what social media's opinion of Grant is going to be by the end, right? But we'll get there in a few minutes. So shall we move over to Juliana's last chance date?
Yeah.
Actually, of the 2 dates, I mean, way better date.
Yeah.
Right. And so she ends up getting the sailboat, catamaran type thing. Yep. Out for the day. It's not raining.
Yeah.
Looks pretty beautiful. So they're, swimming, doing their thing, champagne on the boat. Just a really nice.
I love how he keeps saying to her something like, our physical attraction has always been there. Like I've always wanted to like kiss you every time I've seen you, but like our emotional connection's like really building. Like how he seems so surprised.
Not a great look, Grant. Not a great look.
So yeah, I mean their last date was there wasn't a lot of
it was like
notable
2.5 minutes of screen time for their entire date.
But the conversation that does get had sort of is that he basically says to her, like, look, there's an engagement in 2 days. Are you ready?
And again, she gives a terrible rambling answer.
So rambling. She basically says, like, I'll handle your heart with care. And I was like, oh God, I don't know what that means. But then eventually she gets around to like, but I would be ready to enter an engagement to you, is how she puts it.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand where she was at. And like, again, we're only seeing pieces of these things. And so like on the one hand, like how could you go into an engagement with someone that is so clearly not expressing like their security in whatever the next step is, and like seeing these two, one person that's like, I am so down, I'm so in, I will kind of like bend in order to like make this work for you, and the other that's like yeah, I'll handle your heart with care.
Not inspiring answers. Yeah, it was pretty bad, I thought. So again, she's 0 for 2. Latia, 2 for 2.
Yeah.
Juliana, 0 for 2.
I've got to think, you know, she was hedging a bit. She was trying to guard and protect her heart. She didn't want to put herself fully out there, knowing that there's a 50% chance that she was going to not get picked.
Yeah.
And so like, I can understand that. She was trying to be protecting herself.
Sure. Okay. Anything else you want to talk about on her last chance date or on her time with the family?
No, let's move to engagement day.
Okay. I guess we'll just make a really quick note. Charity, Clayton, and Gary all get pulled up to the hot seat as a throuple to just talk about their experiences, telling multiple people that they love them. And can I just say, they knew the question was coming. They had time to prepare, and all three of them failed.
Yeah.
Terrible answers.
What I would have loved is for Jesse to have said to Charity, or to bring down Dotun, to say, like, Charity, okay, you said I love you to Joey and to Dotun. You're clearly, you know, you and Dotun are in love. You're, you know, planning a wedding that's coming up soon. Like, what advice would you give to whoever Grant picks, or to Grant and whoever he picks, about how to work through that? That would have been a great question, Jesse. Where were you with that? Because that for me was all I kept thinking, is like, again, how are we going to watch this back as a couple? And like, you're going to have to see all this.
We're not getting, and let me just preface this by saying, I love Jesse. I think he does a great job generally. This was not a great job. I also don't think he did a great job on the women tell-all either. I think he's overwhelmingly that this season with these
is it basketball season, or what is he?
He was a football player. He was a football player. And no, it is not football season, sadly. I know. I'm depressed about it too.
Yeah, he just seems a little off.
Yeah,
off his game.
We're not getting any pointed questions.
We haven't seen him.
No, I feel like he's been less visible this entire season. There were a lot of questions that Jesse could have asked that I would have really liked to get some answers to, or at least force them to confront it, you know, it with more pointed questions. And we just didn't get that. So I'm, you know, Jesse, I love you, but I feel like you fell down on this one a little bit here. So day of engagement. We open up with the Grant picking a ring. I had a problem here. Okay. And this is going to be a petty elitist class problem. Those were some really tiny rings. He's driving a $200,000 vehicle. And by the way, before you say, oh, the show gives him that, it's a rental. No. They've made it abundantly clear. He actually owns one of these cars. He's actually driving around. He actually owns a $200,000 car. And you are going to give a girl like basically a chip of a diamond? Like, I just feel like, and again, if you find a girl who doesn't care about that, fantastic.
You know what?
I just feel like there's a priority problem here. And it's not about the amount of money. It's about the relative difference between the toy you bought yourself and the level.
So
of
listen,
commitment.
this isn't Love is Blind. They don't have as much freedom to pick the ring as they do on Love is Blind. Love is Blind, you also buy the ring yourself. Neil Lane, I don't exactly know how this goes, but I think Neil Lane only brings a certain collection. He said in this episode he brought 6 rings. As far as I'm concerned, in all the years I've watched The Bachelor and seen the rings that have been given, these were, in my mind, the most tasteful rings I've seen. Sometimes Neil's rings tend to be like way over
Gaudy,
yeah. And so these were like way more classic.
Okay.
So, and I don't think they were that small. I just at all.
He's driving a $200,000 car.
Yeah.
Again, like if he's driving a $20,000 car, then yeah, the way I look at it is, if I'm going to buy myself a toy, then I need to spend a comparable amount of money showing my commitment to my future spouse. That's all I'm saying. And the amount of money doesn't matter. It's the relative difference between what you spend on yourself and what you're spending on your spouse.
Mhm.
That's my complaint here. But the rings aside,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, he's talking about how he's torn. He's not sure what to do. He went to bed last night, sure he knew what he was going to do and then woke up this morning really unsure. So we got, surprise visit from his dad who still remains in DR. And, essentially his dad gives him a lot of grace essentially and says like, just follow your heart. Like just follow your heart. You'll make the right choice.
Dad, bad advice. This was a follow your head, not your heart. Yeah. What did you think of the advice?
I mean, so listen, I think that the things that Grant was really worried about, he was worried about what happens if I pick someone and it doesn't work out. What happens if I leave here and things are different? Like having all of these what if thoughts that are spinning him up. And in this moment, his head is actually not going to be that helpful because his head is going to be continuing to swarm with all of the what ifs, and it's going to overanalyze and cause this paralysis analysis. When you're anxious and unsure, your head is the least helpful place to be. And so kind of tuning into your intuition, really your gut, is going to be much better of a guiding force than your head. Your head is going to lie to you and trip you up in these moments. And so, yeah, if he was more logical, and they talked about that like earlier on in the season, he's a trader. He has to make decisions. He has to kind of work with that part of his brain. He can't necessarily be emotional in those moments. He has to be able to make a quick decision that's based in logic and reason, something he's really good at. But he's not really good at making emotional decisions. And so his head is not going to lead him in the right place.
I think that actually pans out in the end. But shall we, before we go on to the actual final rose ceremony, whatever we want to call it, the engagements, should we just take a step back here and talk a little bit about what each woman actually signifies? Because I think these are two very distinctly different characters. I think that him picking each one kind of symbolizes a lot of what he actually wants and what he actually is looking for, right? And so when I think you look at Latia is a woman who is mature, knows what she wants, is concise and clear in her explanation of what she wants. She, sure, she can, be a little bit, we'll say, over accommodating, but at the end of the day, she is expressing what she wants. And that if you get into a relationship with her, you are getting everything that you have professed to have wanted, but you are expected to actually fulfill the promises that you have made.
Right. And Grant's dad says Latia is a woman who's going to fight for her marriage. Like she is going to be in and she's going to commit. And I believe that about her.
Yep. I think Juliana, on the other hand, is fun.
That's what he said.
Yeah. I think that ultimately she is an individual who is unserious, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that more in a, like, she's not ready for marriage, really. She doesn't really, she doesn't really know what she's getting herself into. She doesn't really have a plan, she doesn't really have a timeline. And I think that, as far as we know, but we haven't seen anything about it. But she also is somebody, if we think that Latia is a little bit over accommodating, Juliana feels like somebody who you can just basically run roughshod over.
How do you explain them moving to Boston?
I'm a firm believer that, broadly speaking, when you look at relationships dynamics, women are social, men are not. It's far more important to maintain the social structure of a woman. A man can live by himself. He can have zero friends and he will not get depressed and he will not have negative ramifications come of that in large scale. Small scale, sure. If you isolate a woman, just biologically, because women are so much more tethered to community, it's far more impactful. If you separate a woman, and there's tons of studies on this, if you separate a woman from her family and a man from his family, the man does significantly better over the long and short term than a woman does. And so just as a baseline, kind of position to be in a relationship, if you're forced to choose between maintaining the social structures of the woman or the man in the relationship, you obviously always lean towards a woman unless you have a very good, distinct reason not to do that, right? There's a huge job opportunity. There's, you're going to raise kids and you don't like the school district. Like, there are reasons why you wouldn't necessarily follow the female social structure, but that should be your kind of prior if you care at all about the impact of that. Men just don't. That's not how we interact. We're solo creatures by nature.
I saw the kind of discrepancy or disparity between Latia and Juliana described in two different ways. One is that in picking Latia, he was picking a wife, and in picking Juliana, he was picking a girlfriend. So
I think that's great. Yeah.
That's one way. And then the other way I saw was, do you choose a person who loves you fiercely, will love you, or do you choose the person who you love the way they make you feel?
We know how we feel about that.
Yeah.
One is very selfish. Look, Latia is the right pick. There's no way around this. If Grant is true to himself, true to his word, if he's been honest with himself and he's been honest with the audience, there's not even a question here.
Well,
Latia is the obvious pick.
Well, and again, I mean, and I feel I'm finding myself feeling uncomfortable having a strong opinion about that, because he did pick someone and I do wish them well, and it's possible for them to be great and happy. But I think what you're talking about, like, there's the big if there. If what Grant was saying he wanted was actually what he wanted.
And that's the
and
key,
what do you
yes.
God, oh my God, you say it a zillion times. Revealed preference. I learned something on this podcast.
Revealed preference. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
You ignore entirely what people say and you pay attention to what they do. And by paying attention to what people do and their behaviors, you reveal their true preferences, because people are very bad at one, people will lie. There's a lot of reasons why people will not tell the truth when asked a question, social pressures and stuff like that. Sometimes you're just bad at guessing. What
people
you
don't know
do.
what they want,
and the people also just don't know what they want, and it isn't until they're put in a situation to choose. And that's why in economics, we pretty much ignore everything that people say, and we always go to what do people actually do when faced with various different incentive structures. Yes, absolutely. And this is a classic case of revealed preference.
You proud of me for remembering that?
I'm always proud of you. I was wondering where you were going when you were like, there's a phrase here. I'm like, what? I say a lot of things all the time. That's not where I thought you were going. But yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. This is a great example actually of revealed preference.
Got to really pull it out for the last
one of the season. Yep. Oh, you did that one for Max. I can tell the amount of hours I spent talking economics with that cat. Yeah. So let's transition a little bit over to what does it actually mean for Grant to pick each of these women, right? We've talked about kind of a little bit what each woman represents, but in my view, if Grant does not pick Latia, he's basically a liar. And I don't mean that to mean that he's intentionally dishonest. I mean that in that he was lying to himself, and because I too believe he was genuine in what he was saying, but I just don't think that he ever truly understood what all of what he was saying meant. And as a result, when push comes to shove, it actually means that he hasn't been honest with himself, and he is nowhere near ready. And he was dishonest kind of to the audience.
Yeah. I mean, maybe I think there's a huge part, especially when he was talking to his dad. I was like, God, he seems petrified. And, it's not uncommon for individuals, but men specifically that come from families of divorce to be really, really anxious about repeating, the sins of the father. Right. And so like this idea of, what happens if we leave and it's not what I thought it was, or what happens if I pick the wrong person. Like, I think there's like the curse of in Grant picking Latia, he's getting everything he ever wanted. And to your point, then he'd have to fulfill his end. And what if he can't? And like all of those things, am I doomed or destined to repeat, my parents' failed marriage and all of that stuff. And so like, I think that was also a really big part of what was going on for Grant. And again, not to say that he doesn't want to get married and start a family, but I think this does give, I think in his mind, gives him a little bit more of a runway to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it does give him a few more years. Juliana is not going to be beating down the door. It seems like to be having kids.
She's 28, by the way.
Yeah, so she's a couple years younger. I mean, even then, I mean, the runway is not long, regardless, right? But yeah, I mean, look, I want Grant to be happy. I think Grant ultimately is a good guy. I think he is well intentioned and means what he says. I just don't think he understands the magnitude of the things that he's saying. And I think that, if he picks Juliana, that's a perfect demonstration of that. I think when by picking Latia, he would be fulfilling the promise that he gave at the top of the season and in Jen's season. That there were effectively tonal promises that he made, and Latia is a culmination of that, and Juliana is a complete rebuke of those promises.
Yikes.
I mean, it's just what it is, right?
You know what, though? I mean, maybe I'm getting ahead, but like there was something about seeing Grant and Juliana at AFR, and like the way that Juliana not stuck up for Grant. There's nothing to necessarily stick up for, but like the way that she defended their relationship and defended Grant and talked about like her experience of going through this, and like that made me really happy for both of them. Like that they were demonstrating the promise that they were making to one another, and all of these conversations and what a relationship meant to them and like partnership meant to them, what they were doing together demonstrated that. And that was also really cool to see though.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's just roll right on to the
engagements.
The engagements. Look, I think we've all been knowing where this is going for a while. Latia comes down first. She says a kind of like mediocrely kind of vowy type thing. Compared against what Juliana said. Juliana's was actually beautiful. Juliana's was the best thing she had said the entire episode. She saved it for last. I'm like, oh, look at that. You can pull it out when need be. And I was just watching Latia's face. I just wanted to see at what moment did she realize, or when was she realizing this was going south, and how was she going to respond? And we got a little, it was like kind of noticeable. We got a little Hakeem crazy eye thing happening, right? And you saw the turn where she saw it was going. And then Grant drops on her that she's not the pick.
So in the moment, she is very blindsided. We see this happen. And then we see her kind of trying to process what's going on and like, when did this change? And he's trying to say, well, it didn't. And, this is where I was like really impressed with Grant, because you could see him going to respond and get defensive, and then he stopped himself because there's no way like that it's going to be helpful to her actually, or helpful to you, to your case, like, or any of that. And I was really impressed with his restraint here. I mean,
Latia at this point in time, and again, she's justified in being upset here.
Oh yeah, and wanting to ask the questions.
Well, I don't even necessarily know that she was wanting to ask questions. It was very clear that she was now in attack mode, and she was really looking to bury him.
Yeah.
And I thought it took a tremendous amount of restraint on Grant's part to not really feed into it. There were definitely times during this where I'm like, Grant, shut up. Stop talking. And he kept kind of trying to make it a little bit better, but he didn't feed in and get super defensive. And so I actually thought, even though Latia was justified being upset here, I do think that Latia had the worst look, because she just, she's kind of it's one thing to be angry and upset, but she has been so poised this entire season. And to sort of, in your last hurrah of the season, to kind of,
what was she supposed to do? Say thank you for the opportunity and go?
No, I mean, again,
she was still considering. She was still pretty poised.
What I would say is I would be willing to give her a pass up to this point, because I can understand in the moment you really thought you were the pick. Obviously anybody who watched Grant and listened to Grant would think that you were the pick. So I get her being upset. I think where it really turns for me is later, right? But right. I do think,
and the things that she said that like just crushed him is like, I see you very differently now.
Yeah.
And then
Which
he was
is just
saying,
unnecessary attacks on his character.
again, I can't judge her in the moment for thinking she's getting proposed and she's proposed to and she's getting broken up with.
But you know the season, and you know what you signed up
In
for.
her mind, he said to her, or maybe in reality, I don't know. We don't have it on tape. As far as we know, according to her, she walked into this with him saying hours before, we're getting engaged tomorrow. I love you.
That's not what we saw him say.
That's not what we saw him say. That's what she's saying.
So when we're on the couch, I kind of felt like we were seeing a little bit of a recreationist history when she gets into the hot seat. Whereas she starts talking about events, and some of these events we have seen on screen. And my take on it was, again, going back to the kind of the pick me thing, where I'm not sure if you were really being a cringy pick me or if this was more like flirty cuteness because he's been overly affirming. We don't have that context. But one thing that we do know is that she was doing a lot of pick me type behavior towards the end, and he was just kind of like laughing it off and kind of going with the flow of it. But she was initiating these comments, and he was just sort of like letting them flow. That is very different than him initiating these comments. Mm-hmm. And that's the distinction that I would make. And that's where I think that there's a little bit of recreationist history, at least from what we've seen.
Latia basically has her talking point. She wants to make sure that she says them to Grant. And it doesn't even look, she's not really leaving room for Grant to actually respond. I don't think she's actually
she's
interested
no.
in a response from Grant. And that's the part where it's I can, again, in a moment of like imagining a fantasy of like all the things that you would say to your ex about ways that they, hurt you. Like that's a revenge fantasy moment that a lot of women might have. I don't know if men do that. Probably
men do
not
care. No.
But, and so like from that perspective, I can understand how you're like, that's a turnoff to see that. But I also think that it's so understandable given what not only what we saw, but things that she heard and experienced that we didn't get to see. And yeah, to your point, did she, you called it recreationist history. Did she reconstruct a narrative based on her set of information and kind of fit it within a narrative that suited her? Sure. That's probably how she got through the whole experience, was this man has been committing to me the whole way through. Maybe not like identifying with the fact that he might have been as demonstrative with some others as he might have been with you. So all I'm saying is, like, I can agree to an extent to what you're saying, that she went a little bit long on what it was that she was trying to say. And there wasn't actually an opportunity to have a conversation. That's not what this was for her. And I think in this situation, I think she's granted that moment. So Juliana and Grant get engaged, and it's a happy moment, and they seem happy. Is there anything else to talk about with them?
I already said her kind of vowy speech thing was actually the most beautiful thing she said. It was the most coherent thing she said all episode. It was good. Yeah, I mean, they seemed happy. I don't think there's any big surprise here. So, yeah,
it's good. Yeah, they do seem happy. They seem like they're in a strong place. I hope that that's genuine. And they're moving to Boston.
Yeah, so we see him on the couch doing the hot seat thing. You already talked about it a little bit, where she really came out strong in support. The families get some cameo time, and they all are very supportive. Moving to Boston, I think that's probably the right call. Although it does fly in the face of what he had said to Latia about wanting to stay close to his father. But, again, I don't think Grant knows what the heck he actually wants. I think revealed preference, Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wish them luck.
Yeah. But look, they're a cute couple. Do I think that they are actually going to get married? No, I do not. I think this is a 2 or 3 year long relationship maximum. And then they're both back on the market and single, and that'll kind of be that. But who knows?
Yeah,
maybe. I'm happy you asked about my rose this week.
Love it. My thorn this week.
I hated to see that.
Overall thoughts on the season?
I mean, rose and thorn for this season. I think that the thorn for the season is just that it was sluggish at times. It was real painful to get through some of those episodes. We didn't get juiced with any real drama. The Zoe drama died out very quickly. The Carolina drama was just so tired and one note and repetitive. that it just felt kind of like a slog. I can understand why they didn't throw a lot of marketing behind it, and I can understand why the ratings were down.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I do think Grant, you know, is a genuine good guy who is still discovering who he is as a person.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know, any rose and thorns for season or
Yeah.
episode?
Well, I guess, I definitely went into this episode feeling, this season rather, feeling a little trepidatious, like really liking Grant and being very excited about him, but like also being a little bit worried based on the lack of marketing that we saw. And I think that overall, Grant did a really good job. And I came away still really liking him. And again, as a bachelor, that's a really hard feat to accomplish. Is he Joey Grazade? No, but I think that following Joey, he did a really good job. And so I think Grant gets my rose truly for the season. He did a fantastic job. And I think my thorn is for both the drama that we saw while also the lack of drama that existed. It just wasn't a very engaging season. And there wasn't really a lot to talk about. And as a viewer, that made it difficult to watch. But I did feel it was interesting watching this in parallel to Love is Blind. It made me really appreciate the show a lot more. Because I felt like even though what we were seeing was, again, heavily producer, facilitated, it felt a little bit more authentic
Yeah.
than what we see on Love is Blind. And yes, is it performative sometimes on The Bachelor? Sure. But it made me really appreciate what we did get. And so I guess I'm rounding out with like more roses than thorns, but I'm not only like I enjoyed this season and I'm also happy like that it's over.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought Love is Blind was a horrific season that was really hard to get through.
Mm-hmm.
It's really sad that both Love is Blind and The Bachelor were both just sort of dud seasons
Mm-hmm.
in general. And that's not to mean that there weren't interesting characters, there weren't some interesting things to dissect and analyze. It's just like there wasn't genuine drama in either one of them.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were kind of, paralleling each other was made it kind of a difficult season, I would say. I already, kind of mentioned that my thorn was a slog, similar to what you were saying. In terms of Rose, for the season, I agree that Grant was really good. It's weird because while we didn't have a lot of drama, I actually did kind of like a lot of the casting of the season.
Mm.
I thought, we sort of took a little bit of a return in some ways to a more traditional kind of cast where we actually cast, interesting women that are also attractive conventionally.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them had interesting jobs and had interesting things to say.
Yeah.
And, I just feel like there's been a bit of a deviation from that. It's like,
I
more
agree.
recent
This
years.
was a great group of women.
Yeah, I just think that for whatever reason, the drama just didn't happen. But there was
But maybe that's because
opportunity.
it was a more mature, established group of women.
I don't know. Remember, Joey's season was a more mature, established group of women, and
Were
they got yeah. Remember, it was a little bit of an older season, and yeah. Anyway, I don't really know why the drama didn't happen. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more drama somewhere just to get
Make
some
it
excitement in,
interesting.
make it
Yeah.
interesting. But I do genuinely think that a lot of the women were ended up being interesting characters,
Mhm.
right? Um, yeah. So that's my Rose and Thorn.
Okay. Well, we did it. Season 29 in the books.
One more season down.
All right.
Have a little bit of a hiatus here.
Yep. Yeah. So our plan is to come back for Bachelor in Paradise, and who knows? Maybe you'll see us between now and then. But we will be checking in the comment section. Of course, you can continue to follow us on Reactivity TV on Instagram. We'll be posting stuff there for the time being. And yeah, keep in touch with us in the comments or through email, reactivitytv@revivecfw.com. We will see you all soon. Take good care.
See you next season.
Bye.